Good evening and welcome to my channel. My name's Simon. Science Fiction Retirement Library is my goal. I buy a lot of books. I do book hauls, mystery boxes, and I also do a few reading updates and reviews. I'm not reading as much as I want to. That's been the story of my life. And usually when I do reading reviews, it's kind of 2 or 3 books at a time. But I wanted to do something different today because a book really hit me. So I think I mentioned something about this on a post, but today I want to talk about Olaf Stapledon's Sirius. Now, I bought this just as a random Sci-Fi Masterworks pickup when I last went to 66 books. So you'll see a video about 66 books coming up, but this was from maybe 2 years ago I got this. And it's just sat around. And I actually picked it up to take it with me on one of my recent work trips because it was quite small. And I just thought, you know. And I kind of remember liking Star Maker that I read a long time ago, but I didn't really think anything of this. Now, I have to say that this hit me harder than a lot of books have recently. And it was one of those books where at the weekend where I was traveling for work, I spent a lot of time in this book to try to finish it because it was just one of those ones that spoke to me, which are quite rare. I don't know what the percentage is that other people think when that really happens, but this book really spoke to me. And I'm pretty sure there's going to be people that maybe even find this boring, but it just, you know, it fueled all of my biases and yeah, it touched me. And I just want to kind of explain why and then give you a little feel for the book to see if you want to read it or not, basically. I'll try and do it without spoilers, but I do want to give you a feel for the book. So anyone that knows anything about this book, some of it you can obviously guess as you go along because it's a well-trodden path now, but it wasn't back then. And I've done another one of my memory stimulus cards, and you'll see in the middle there it says 1944. So as I always do, I read this. Actually, I wasn't thinking really of the time when I was reading this, but you can tell it was written in 1944, and I'll explain why. In terms of World War II, there's a backdrop to it, but it doesn't play a major role in the story apart from towards the end. But just in general, the writing style I want to talk about, because I'd have to say maybe I'm a traditionalist from, you know, doing English literature at A-level in university. You become like this literary critic, or you kind of find things that you like and you're not really sure of the reason. But the 1940s style that I will mention, I kind of like, and I like Olaf Stapledon as a writer for sure. Very different to other writers that I love, like Ellison, for example, but I'll explain why. Now, the first thing I want to say is I got a few books from my collection. I thought I had 3 copies of this, but I don't. And this is just, if you've read these, it's the same kind of story or same kind of impact. So the stories it reminded me of, and it's quite obvious in some cases. The evolution of Bruno Littlemore was something I got a while ago. It didn't hit, this one hit me a lot harder than this, and this I like a lot more than this. But this is a similar idea because it has an animal, in this case an ape, that in some way is treated like and moving in the world of humans. So Bruno Littlemore, linguist, artist, philosopher, a life defined by a soaring mind. Now, soaring mind is one of the things I'm very interested in, and this book is also very much about. Yet bound by a restrictive body. I'll go into it. Born in downtown Chicago, Bruno's precocity pulls him from an unremarkable childhood and under the tuition of Lydia. Blah, 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 great blurb. And then it says, Bruno's hairy body, flattened nose and jutting brow are undeniably the features of a chimpanzee. So this whole book is about a very, very intelligent, they are anyway, but greater than human intelligence chimpanzee. So you can imagine some of that. Now, I did like this. It's not one of my favorites. Some of it was a bit, I have to say, strange. But the other one, it obviously reminded me of what this reminded me of, and hit me in the same way as one of my favorite books of all time, which is Flowers for Algernon, Daniel Keyes. And I actually picked up this in a recent haul, which is an older version of it. Now, those that know about this is also about, it's slightly different. It's not like it's not a mind in a fettered body, but it is someone who didn't have this soaring mind and acquired a soaring mind, and what that means in a world that judges. And also in this book, those that know, it's about the losing of a soaring mind. So this is incredibly powerful, this book. I had the same feelings as I did when first reading Flowers for Algernon, I don't know, 25 years ago, whatever it was, and to reading this. Slightly different, but a huge overlap. So that gives you the flavour of this book if you know anything about those two books. But I'll give you a bit of introduction, I'll explain why, and we'll go from there. Okay, so this is about, it's basically 2 or 3 main characters. There's a lot more. So the main character is obviously Sirius, who is a dog bred by a scientist called Thomas. So Thomas had an idea to develop greater intelligence and using animals as the subject, right? And he had a lot of failures. There's a lot of description about those failures, and it's kind of sad in a way, but Sirius is like the light. It's the one that comes through, and I didn't know this, but you guys probably will, so Sirius in the real world is the dog star, and it's the brightest star that you see in the night sky. So it's great naming for this, and even on the book you can see that it's shown there. So Sirius was like this miracle that came through as a puppy, and when they were doing the testing, he was off the scale, and they realized he even had a kind of a slightly bigger skull, etc., and the brain was proven to be of a human capacity. And that's the start of the story, and the whole story is basically following Sirius through that journey. Now, the interesting thing is the narrator, it's not Sirius, it's not Thomas who's the scientist, it's not Plaxi, and Plaxi is Thomas's daughter, who becomes basically the sibling of and best friend of Sirius. The narrator is actually kind of a third party, and as I said about the 1940s writing style, it's very matter of fact. It's very clear. I've written down here, clear, direct language. Now, I say that and it sounds like maybe it's kind of robotic and boring. It's not, because I love, you know, the way things are described and some of the words that have gone out of use now that were in use in the 40s, right? So the way it's described and the way Sirius is described is, there is no what you'd maybe call now flowery language, or even kind of hidden meanings to some extent. But you just flow with it. That's what I found. I flowed with it, but also there was a beauty in just the 40s dialect, let's say. So yeah, you've got Plaxi the daughter, Thomas the scientist, Elizabeth is Thomas's wife, and then Sirius the dog. And the backdrop to everything is like rural Wales, farming Wales, which to me really adds to it. I actually wrote down here, it's like one of the main characters in a way, because you can't have a story about a dog without understanding the dog's environment. And anyone that's had dogs, and I grew up with dogs, I grew up with an Afghan hound, believe it or not, their life is inside and outside, right? And if you think of a dog that's also got the brain power of a human, and the intelligence of a human, I'm going to put this down, they've got the internal as well, so the inside and the outside. And if you're in rural Wales in the farm, a dog's going to get distracted by its basic instincts. And this book is a lot about that. It's about the basic instincts of an entity, you know, evolutionary biology, that feels certain things, but also has the mental power to question it and understand. So kind of natural instincts versus, you know, a life of the mind. And I've always been intrigued by that. And I actually think that humans are fighting that as well. So they might not have as much bloodlust, let's say. Most people, luckily, don't have the bloodlust of, we call it the wolf mood. So I've written down here wolf mood. So Sirius has wolf mood. But all, especially men, I believe, are the best men have quashed any of those evolutionary instincts, right? The modern man of empathy and thoughtfulness and kindness and being quiet and listening. If you really track us back to our ancestors, that was probably against what we were. So Sirius I found is an allegory or a mirror to actually, maybe not modern man as such, because we've kind of improved so much, but maybe in 1944 or before, some of what we would call traditional misogyny or manhood or some of those traits, this really hinted at that. So we've got Plaxi, Thomas, Elizabeth. The first part of the book is basically understanding the relationship between Plaxi, the daughter, and Sirius, the dog, and understanding what bonds are formed. And the good thing about it is you started to feel the bonds that you have with your animals and then go beyond that. And you started to not really, well, you always saw Sirius as a dog, but that was because he was openly aware of, and in many cases, as he goes through his life, getting frustrated because he's a dog. And what I mean by that is he very, very quickly understood that he was at a physical disadvantage in many areas. So if you think of Plaxi, the girl, as a sibling of Sirius, the dog, Sirius was obviously, in terms of smell and sound, was competing like siblings do, sibling rivalry, with Plaxi. But Plaxi, for example, had hands. And there's a tone throughout the book of, and it becomes bitter. Sirius becomes bitter because he believes that humans do not even understand how amazing hands are. And he calls them like let me get it right, the instruments of creation, which is basically what they are, right? And he had the brain to want to create. So create art, write poetry. He writes a book in the end because he manages to do something with his paws, but it's all a struggle against his physical form. And actually, even at the end, when he is trying, he really becomes like of the mind. In the middle part of the book, he's creating what he calls art to do with smells, basically, art of odor. Because that's something he can do, and it's very different to think of those things. But there is definitely an understanding as he gets more intelligent, or basically goes through his teenage years and coming of age, that he's restricted, he's even disabled, he's hampered when compared to Plaxi and other humans. And he goes through the emotional roller coaster that I think most human teenagers, etc., do, the existential stuff of, I'm really interested in all these things. Like, he finds Shakespeare and Eliot and Hardy and Browning and wants to express it, his love for it, wants to write about it. He wants to create music, but he can't play an instrument. So he becomes a singer and uses and becomes a kind of not a successful singer because he can't be seen, for example, doing some of these human things because people are freaked out, or he's kidnapped at some stage, or attempted kidnap. So a lot of the book is what an incredible mind in a body that doesn't allow, in some cases, that incredible mind to be what it could be. And even through this, I was thinking even of like the diving bell and the butterfly, right? About the guy who got locked in syndrome. I'm thinking of, as a rugby fan, I'm thinking of the guys that recently got MND and were very, very expressive people. And then they got to a point where they couldn't express themselves as they want because the body failed. There was a lot of that. And obviously with that, and things like my dad dying of a debilitation disease where he degraded to the point where he couldn't move, but his brain was pretty active. It just stirs so many emotions on so many levels, and there's so many things that come in and out while you're reading. And I was on my own traveling for work, and it just had such a power on me. And I hope that's coming across. Again, pretty chaotic, but you know what I mean. So it's all about super intelligence and the creation of that, and I've always been intrigued by that. Just what that means, and even that just maybe being a disability, how someone thinks. You know, when I was growing up, we didn't have neurodivergence. We didn't have a lot of the diagnoses we have now. But for sure, there was a spectrum before there was a spectrum, and that dictates how easy life is, or even how you interact with people and all that, obviously. But yeah, the important thing was that Sirius was super intelligent, but he was colorblind. His vocal cords were not human, and he had paws versus hand, and then he was fighting this wolf mood, this hunter instinct. So what do you do in that situation? How does he find his place? So it's also the outcast, the outlier. And there's some amazing quotes and discussions that he has, mainly with Thomas, but also there's a guy called Pew that he goes to live with, basically when Plaxi goes off to university or boarding school. And he's a kind of not simple, but he's a farmer who's very active, hands-on, practical, and it's a really good a really good difference for Sirius to go from the scientific world with Thomas, and he goes to live in Cambridge, for example, with the professors. They're studying him, but he also tries to feel part of the studiers, not just the studied. But then he spends a lot of time with Pew in terms of practical farming. And Pew actually kind of becomes heartbroken in some ways because he can see Sirius's potential to create but can't do it. But also one of the things that hit me was when towards the end, Thomas and Sirius are starting to have heart-to-hearts, and Sirius's kind of questions are, why did you make me? Why did you make me if you didn't make a place for me also in this world? So the experimented on, the Frankenstein, basically. Or even AI to some extent now, right? The Hale from 2001 is, hold on, you've created me. I am conscience. I have conscience. I have agency, but I'm trapped in a certain way. So why didn't you think about this? And again, that just comes up with many, there's so many avenues you can go down with that in terms of having kids in the modern world. And there's so many things. So yeah, those heart-to-hearts, it always has an underlying poignance and narrative on the human condition. And the way that's expressed the most is the relationship between Sirius and Plaxi. So young girl growing up, goes to boarding school, comes back after semester 1, Sirius comes back as well, and it's made clear that Plaxi, like any girl of that age, is changing, and Sirius is battling with certain things, but he has a bond with Plaxi, which is, I think, similar to Sisters and Brothers, but it's like a spiritual bond, because it's also the bond between, to some extent, a pet and a pet owner, or someone who is looked after and someone who looks after. But it's a very interesting and disjointed relationship because both of them think they're doing it, if you know what I mean. So the one thing to note, and I missed this, is, and it doesn't say it on here, but there is a subtitle to Sirius, and the subtitle is A Fantasy of Love and Discord. And that brings in, if I'd seen that on the front, or I'd read that or realised that, that makes sense, because it is a love story. And it's not, you can't simplify it into a love story between a woman and a dog, let's say, right? It really isn't that. It's a love story of the mind. It's a love story of spirituality. It's a love story, like the best love stories, of finding your place in the world and finding a connection with someone or people that allows you to be in that world to fulfill your fullest potential. The sad thing is there is a little desolation in that, desolation as well in there. There's a hopefulness and a hopelessness. There's an understanding of education and family and nature and outdoors and learning and everything being so powerful. But there's also an understanding of maybe your fate is already written. He will always be a dog. Sirius will always be a dog. But he has this brain that is so aware of being a dog, and he lives a life outside of being a dog, that he just finds it incredibly difficult to progress into happiness. Now, he does find happiness in Cambridge, for example, when he's going and living the, not the student life so much, but the academic life. And he's got the brain power to understand what's going on and stuff. But obviously he understands he's also a part of that. He is the subject of that. But also when he goes to spend more time with Pew, the weird thing is, I felt, it sounds a strange thing, but I felt like some relation to Sirius, because you go through life thinking, well, if I'm incredibly conscientious, I work hard, I use whatever I have, intelligence, talent, trait that, is more likely to do well here, then I'll be happy. And what it does is it complicates your life, because you fill it with all of these challenges and tasks. And I don't know about you, but I'm more to the other end of simplifying my life to find happiness. And that's what Sirius actually does. He moves away, not from the life of the mind, because it's always there. His love of reading and music and art, etc., which he creates all of these things, coincides with also extracting himself from some things. Now, there's a few things that happen that I can't really tell you about, but he feels he has to extract himself from some things, from the human world, and he basically spends time on the farm, kind of in hiding, and it's related to his bloodlust, his wolf mood. Again, his ancestors, his closest ancestors are wolves, right? Ours are apes. What are the traits of those two types, and how do they play out in terms of their social interactions, in terms of how they eat? What a smell will do to them, what a sound will do to them. It's very obvious early doors that Sirius hears things, smells things, and they have a much deeper impact on him than when Plaxi does. Or just mean completely different things. The translation of a smell in a forest, for example, or in a kitchen in a house, the subjectivity and the perception and then the triggering of that is it's described very, very well. So yes, a lot of nature versus nurture, but also the evolutionary biology stuff is how much can you escape what was meant for you. And I just find that really interesting. So yeah, Plaxi develops as she's going through boarding school. She comes back. They drift apart is like the obvious way of describing it. And that's what happens to human relationships, right? Friends from primary school, secondary school, you go off, you have experiences, and some stay through, some don't. The way this is described is the loneliness of Sirius when Plaxi changes and becomes what he describes as a carer for the trivial. So she obviously, as part of her kind of coming of age and needing to court, and she eventually, for example, finds a man, etc. What does that mean when you're a brother? That's all natural. When you're a dog and you form a bond, it's just those kind of ideas. I can't really go into too much detail, but basically they drift apart. Something happens where actually Plaxi realizes her bond with Sirius, and at some point actually does come back to support him, to live with him, to scaffold him, and in that moment there's also happiness for Sirius and also for Plaxi, I think. But you have to remember, this is in 1944. How was that seen when people hear rumours that a dog who basically can get to a point where he sings, get to a point where he talks, he can create things, he writes letters, for example, to Plaxi at school, giving updates on his life on the farm. When that gets out, then you can imagine the types of rumours and people looking down their nose and questioning things and bullying, etc. that happens. And that's kind of what happens. It gets out. Again, I'm not spoiling anything. The story goes in certain ways that are coming, but it's how well it's done. So yeah, the big change was when Plaxi went to boarding school, but they did come back. And I can't tell you, I'm not going to tell you what happens then and towards the end. All I can tell you is I was in tears, and I haven't been in tears with a book. I can't really remember tears in a book. It reminded me when I first watched The Notebook with my wife. I shouldn't be saying this, but Notebook with my wife, which is about Alzheimer's, dementia, and the moments of clarity that happen. And there's been others, obviously, but that kind of feeling, it was like, it was the inevitable, and it was life, but also, wow, maybe some of it's not fair. And that's what we're all fighting against, right? Is the fairness of the world, and to be happy with our limited time on it. And I just thought this book had it. I've put a couple of things in here which I don't normally do, and one of it said page 66 quote, which I think is to do with the life of the mind. And if I can find it, I just wanted to read part of it. Literally just one sentence. And it kind of explains how he was feeling when he started to realise what humans were, and he became bitter towards humans, as I said, with the hounds, etc. But it said, but what Sirius now craved most was indoor life, with reading, music, talk, and all the little affairs that fill the day. So after a day or two of almost entirely social life, he began to take up once more some of his old private occupations. Again, it's the whole science fiction retirement library is kind of based on that. It's being drained by the outside world, and the masks that you all have to, you know, no one does it. Well, some people do, but I wouldn't say I put a mask on. I'm very the same across the board, but it gets tiring playing the game in the real world, and you have to play some kind of the game, right? Because you have to, unfortunately, in the Western world, earn a bit of money, you know, to be able to do the things you want to do. And he gets to a point very quickly where he understands that the stuff out there isn't the stuff that's valuable to me. It's the stuff in here, and how that's expressed, and the connections I can make. But obviously, there's a handful of people like Plaxi, where the connections are very important, the outside. And they used to do things together. They used to do the creative pursuits together, the drawing, the painting, etc., and then no longer did because she became trivial. And that kind of stuff is just very, very intriguing to me. And there's another bit here where he finds religion, or he gets to the point where he's interested in religion. Like, again, I think every teenager, every coming of age is understanding what that is and getting to a point of a belief system. And it's finding your own feet when you learn about all of the, you know, the ones that are out there and famous, and then building your own belief system based on, you know, your own heart. And it's a really interesting thing because he does actually live with Elizabeth, who's Thomas's wife's cousin at some stage, to get away, and he's a pastor. So he actually starts to learn a little bit more about religion and the church in general, and realizes the beauty of community and people coming together and, for example, singing, and he wants to be part of that. And he actually starts to become a really good singer. But obviously his name, I can't remember his name, I don't know if I put it, but the pastor can't allow the dog in the church because of the fear of the people and the what's this is crazy or whatever. So he sings behind a curtain as a treat, and it actually grows the congregation because it's so beautiful, but he can't be seen. So again, look at what the emotions that would trigger. So as Sirius walked home to the laboratory after his day with Plaxi, brooding on the shortcomings of man, I brood on that a lot, and his own loneliness and the indifference of the universe, he began to slip into the wolf mood. Frustration always tended to have this effect on him, and he was feeling desperately frustrated. He longed for self-expression and could find no means of attaining it. When he was a puppy, he had decided that he would be a general, deploying his human troops with superhuman skill, charging with them to superhuman victory. Ludicrous, impossible dream. Later, he had determined to be an explorer of the Siberian tundra or prairies, a country that he thought suited his powers. But how could a dog take the necessary gear with him without causing excitement among the human inhabitants? Or perhaps Australian sheep farming would suit him, or some kind of hunting career in the north of Canada. No. By now it was all too clear that nothing would suit him. Nothing was possible but to be a super lapdog come super laboratory animal. Like, I know it's about a dog thinking about where he fits in the life, but it's not. It is a mirror of, I believe, how we feel. Where is my place? What will I be doing? I've coached rugby a bit, and I've had 14, 15-year-old boys who I now know through to 20, 21 graduate, etc. It's the same thing. It's the same things people battle with. And you're so hopeful back then, and you want to keep hope alive in those kids and those people finding their feet. But there is a realization later on that some of those dreams, not that they're unobtainable, I still believe that is true, but I don't know, there's just a reality, a stark reality presented in this book, that maybe you can only go so far with the mind, because the body and the external world, i.e. mainly other people, may not allow you to get to that point. So it sounds, in conclusion, it sounds pretty harsh. As I said, I found it a tearjerker, but I think those books, I've left it a long time before I've done this review as well, because I wanted it to simmer, but I still feel the same as I did when I first put it down. And it's one of those ones I wanted to talk to my wife about and explain and share. So yeah, I probably sound over the top, but one of those books that is definitely now on my top X lists, and I really recommend it. So if you like that more human condition, heartfelt, grounded fiction, it is scientifically based, and it's got that kind of twist of, a dog within, so science fiction, it is a masterwork, then please have a check. If you like Flowers for Algernon, for example, have it. If you like 2001, if you've ever read The Evolution of Bruno, Littlemore, check it out. I think you'll like it too. Yeah, one of my favorites. So 5 stars. Thank you very much. If you like this, like, share, comment, ring the bell, and thank you to everyone for your support. This channel is blowing my mind and is very, very good for me to continue doing it. Cheers.